One of the greatest things about the American political system, perhaps the single most important aspect of our system, is democracy, right? In its purest form, meaning that our elected officials and the American people, those are the sole entities of the influence in which the direction our country goes, right? Ideally, that's the way it's supposed to work. Yet, you know, it seems these days, especially when you watch some of the other cable news channels, that we find more and more that it's not elected officials that are giving their 2 cents on important issues. It's actually unelected officials, right? Like people who are talking about war and impeachment and that type of thing. In fact, we have an example for what we're talking about here. Let's start with John Bolton, shall we? Here's John Bolton, a guy who's, remember, John Bolton, no longer a part of the Trump administration, right? In a speech earlier this week at a Washington think tank that happens to be beloved by Raytheons of the world, he could be heard still trying to convince the American people, despite no longer holding office, that we should be going to war with North Korea. Here it is.
I am delighted to be here today. I'm also sure the leadership of North Korea is delighted that I'm here today in a private capacity. If you believe, and you may not, that it is unacceptable for North Korea to have nuclear weapons, at some point, military force has to be an option.
You betcha, baby. Military force, that's the option. That's what we need to do, despite the fact that we're already in 7 wars and we've been in one in Afghanistan, which he has propagated, as well as Iraq, for going on 18 years. But he's not the only one. Then there's former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She obviously lost the general election to Donald Trump, but here she is proclaiming that democracy is in crisis due to her opponent's actions, and she says impeaching him is the only viable option. Here it is.
This occupant of the Oval Office poses a clear and present danger to our future, to our democracy.
Jatras is joining us now to talk about this. You know, it really is interesting that we have the folks who are in charge, right, Jim? The folks that we've elected, although many of them I know are buffoons as well.
Sure.
But they're doing their thing, right? And then you see the media constantly going after the people who are not in power, the people who Hillary Clinton, sure, God bless her soul, was not elected president, yet she's out there talking. Bolton just got basically kicked out of the Trump administration. He's out there talking, and the New York Times and everybody else is quoting him.
Well, I think there are 2 constants here. One is, of course, orange man bad, whoever is going to turn against Trump, including all of his former underlings. And it makes you wonder, why does he surround himself with people who obviously don't like him and don't agree with his policy inclinations? And then he's surprised when they come and trash him after that they're out of office. And the other one, of course, is that the war party still is in charge, that if you're for war against Iran or North Korea, and Trump, you know, God bless him, whatever else you might criticize him for, does not want to take that step, right, and that is then used against him by all these people that call themselves the resistance.
But there really is, I mean, I started reading about, we had our editorial meeting when this subject first came up, and I didn't see this until I went back into my office and I started looking at some of the stories that have been being written about Bolton. He's actually suddenly being written about more favorably.
Funny how that works.
Since he's out of the White House, right?
Well, you even have Joy Reid here saying maybe he's the guy who will flip on Ukraine, because after all, we didn't give the nice Ukrainians their weapons to kill Russians with.
So they're embracing him now.
Of course, yes, yeah. But it's too certain, it's too consistent to be an accident in this case. It's the pattern we see over and over again.
It's, you know what, I was talking to somebody here who's very close to me, and we were talking about this very subject here from an editorial standpoint, and it seems like what's missing is just a degree of fairness. Let's talk, for example, about this whole impeachment thing for a minute. Not to get too deep in the weeds into the politics, but there are questionable actions that were taken by Vice President Biden having to do with his son. Sure. I mean, that's obvious, right? Yeah. Like my mother would say, if you could see 2 fingers in front of your face, then you can see that, right? But when Democrats are asked about this whole impeachment thing and the subject of Biden comes up, they run like they're scared, like they don't want to face it. Why not just say yes? That might be an issue, and the Trump thing might be an issue as well.
You're right, because again, I think it comes back to that. First off, the hatred of Trump is irrational. I think it goes beyond what he does or doesn't do. And let's face it, this has to do with Hillary and her emails and all the rest of it. Is that there does seem to be a certain sense of a protected class, mostly Democrat, but not entirely.
Right.
That you can break the laws, you can do corrupt things, and it's somehow politically wrong to hold you accountable for it. They say Trump is targeting his political enemy. Does being a political enemy of Donald Trump grant you immunity from investigation?
No, but the investigation should not be done by the president. It should be done by the Justice Department. And for him to go over there and be asking the guy, I need you to do me a favor, is crazy. You admit that, right?
No, I don't. Because can he trust anybody in his government to actually carry out his instructions?
Well, that's a whole different question.
Yeah,
if our government our government is that far bad that the President of the United States cannot trust his Justice Department to do anything, then my God,
he sure can't trust. He sure can't trust the CIA, can he?
But here's what's interesting about this, Jim. It's really my job to call balls and strikes, right?
Yeah.
Shouldn't it be that way across the board, not just for journalists, but for politicians? The Republicans who say Trump can do nothing wrong. Right. The Democrats who are not willing to admit that Biden did something wrong. Aren't they the same?
I think there's some truth to that, but I don't think it's as even-handed as you make out. To start with, remember, the media, and I'm talking about the legacy media, whatever we want to call them, they are all on one side, and the Republicans are terrified of them. All they've got on their side is Fox, and that's not an equal fight.
Well, it's not true. They have Fox, and they have every single radio station in America, which is where the heartland gets its news.
But those are not the facts that count. The facts that count in Washington are what's on the three networks, CNN, the Washington Post, New York Times. The rest doesn't count.
You know what? It's great to have you back. I'm so glad. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
So you haven't heard that we're the ones covering the stories that you won't see covered anywhere else? In Venezuela, Kazakhstan. Let's go to Hong Kong. And the media reaction to that has been crickets. How about the way we cover those stories? What the hell does that mean? Wally, Wally, Wally. That's the key word in this case, uprising. Keep? Can you believe that? Watching. This is the right thing for members of the media to do, to actually pick sides. Look, if you like what you see, subscribe.